Alright guys, so today on top this is one of my coworkers' new trucks. He drives a turboed OBS with a pretty big engine and a little bit of spray. It's a pretty nice truck, all one color. Apparently it's pretty quick. Hopefully we'll see him at the track one of these days. Should be pretty cool. Up to this point, I've probably washed the car about 4 times now because it keeps raining. But, it's neither here nor there. This is more my speed right here. I like this. My boy has a S10 hubcap for the air cleaner lid. I love it. Now we're kind of moving towards the stages of turboing the car finally. I've had this carburetor for probably like a year or so. So to begin with, this is a factory refurbished Quick Fuel Technologies 850 blow-through annular booster design. And this would be like the basic version of this would be a Holley double pumper or a 4150 style mechanical secondary carburetor would be the other designation of this. This one's just built to be a blow-through carburetor for supercharged or turbocharged applications, and it's metered and set up for that. Quick Fuel Technologies, from my understanding, is still made here in the US, and this is actually one of their factory refurbished units, hence the, let's see if you guys can see it, the FR. You might not be able to see it. That's stamped on the air horn there. And as you can see, this is like a full race style carburetor, since there is no choke provision at all on this. That means that it's just a smoother way for air to get in. There's no disruption in the airflow here. Also, since it's made for racing, you're just gonna get it warm and go wide open. Basically, you're not really worried about getting it warm and getting it all ready. You're just going. So the thing that makes this a double pumper, you'll hear that a lot in the aftermarket performance world if you're messing with carburetors. They're referring to the 2 accelerator pumps, one for the primary and secondary. And what those do is when you hit the throttle real quick, it just shoots fuel out of nozzles that would be up here right into the barrels of the carburetor itself, because the boosters themselves rely on airspeed. So when you whack the throttle, the airspeed isn't there yet, so it needs that shot of fuel coming from the accelerator pump discharge nozzles, which would be right here. Before I go on, this is just sort of a basic rundown of 4150 double pumper style carburetor. Um, I haven't done a tech tip video in a while, so this would be kind of a cool little thing to talk about, especially considering that this is what's going to make the turbo actually work on the car. You know, this is what turns it from naturally aspirated to blow through. 4150 is, I think, a reference to the bolt style of the carburetor, or it might be just referring to the fact that this has two metering blocks in it. So being a mechanical secondary double pumper, it has a secondary metering block, therefore actually making the fuel inlets, the distance from them, different than a 4160, which only has one metering block in the primary only. So if we're referencing this side, the primary on this guy is going to be this bowl. These end caps, these silver end caps on here are called bowls, and the middle red pieces here are your metering blocks. So starting from the outside in, these bowls hold reservoirs of fuel that the metering blocks meter into the main body and the annular boosters shoot in. These main bowls, or fuel bowls, have a little glass sight on the side, so you can actually set the level of fuel you want in the bowl itself. And they're also the main feed of your fuel, this threaded portion here. You take these screws off, there's 4, and you can get to the accelerator pump if you need to. You can adjust that with this little screw here. All that does is you're setting your preload on the actual accelerator pump plunger arm, and all it is just a little reservoir, a little diaphragm here that pumps the shot of fuel through the metering block, through the main body, and that's where it shoots out the fuel through the nozzle up here. This red part in the middle is your metering block. That's sort of the brain. That's what meters how much fuel goes into the carburetor. And underneath the bowl, I'll take one of these off and show you, there's little brass jets. They look like these guys here that are in the main body. They serve a different purpose, and they meter the fuel. They're the main jets. There's also a power valve. The needle and seat live in the bowl as well, and that's how you adjust the level of fuel within the bowl itself. So one thing to really note is if you're having issues where you think the needle is sticking and the fuel is overflowing, you always want to make sure that you're within the operating fuel pressure range for one of these carburetors, which, if I'm not mistaken, can be like 4.5 to like 6 or 7 psi. So definitely want to get yourself just a decent quality fuel pressure regulator gauge, or fuel pressure gauge, preferably liquid filled like this one is. You can see the air bubble in its side. If it's in the engine compartment or somewhere where it'll see vibration, the needle's not bouncing up and down. So the bowl screws themselves are 5/16 thread, or 5/16 headed. all of these bolts are sealed. You can see that the gasket that actually seals them, or O-ring or washer, whatever you want to call it, got stuck to the bowl, which is normal. They'll do that. And you can see here that the accelerator pump is literally just a lever with a diaphragm, and there's a little umbrella valve inside. This thing works like basically like a toilet valve, where it fills up to a certain level, the float comes up, and the valve shuts off the needle and seat. And that's all it is. And that's how it regulates how much fuel stays in the bowl ready to go. And this was actually clean. I must have cleaned this when I took it off the car a few months back. So funny thing about this was, in one of my original videos, or probably my first or second video, maybe the third one, the engine was out of the car, and that was because the transmission decided to grenade itself into a bunch of pieces. I actually have a couple videos covering what happened there, or at least the install of the engine. I didn't really talk about the carburetor at the time. And now, right before that, I actually had this installed because I thought I was going to be able to turbo this whole deal. So I had this carburetor. I have literally everything set up to turbo the car. It just broke. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to enjoy it while it's in A and just keep driving it because I like driving my car a lot. And I already had this carburetor. You know, this has been in the works for at least a year and change now. So hopefully not too much longer, and this guy will be actually doing its job. I might just install this for the time being just to have it done. The more I can do to get the car ready for turbo time, the faster it can happen once I actually get a fabricator to take some time and build the kit. So back to the carburetor. So there is, starting from the top on this, there's a vent whistle. It's just a vent for the bowl. Something fell in there. And you can see that this is like machined really smooth and nicely in here. That's the really nice thing about these quick fuel carburetors, is they're aluminum. They're not the zinc or whatever they cast the normal Hollies out of, the more traditional units. And it's like mostly billet pieces, so it's really nice. And these are those main jets I was talking about. And these will usually have a stamped number, so this one has 80s in the primary. This would be the primary side, or the front in my car. And you can see the power valve right here. So this works off of vacuum. Once it sees vacuum drop below a certain level, it'll then also add fuel. It'll enrich. Basically, when it sees that there's less vacuum or less restriction, what it'll do is it sees that, hey, you're going wide open throttle, therefore vacuum will drop. And that's how that works. So it'll be like a 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. And you just kind of got to know what your vacuum is on your engine. And you can sort of play around with how that kicks in, how early or how late it kicks in on enriching the fuel. Behind this is just the main body where this mates up to. Nothing really to see back there. And then we finally get to the main body. So why is this a 4-barrel? Well, because it has 4 holes to allow air in. On the main body itself, you have the accelerator linkage, which is this guy. You can get like a bushing here that controls the throttle, or you can use a stud. Just depends on your throttle spring return and what your cable is set up like. You can also hook up your transmission control if you have like a kickdown cable or something like that. On the other side, or actually not done on this side yet, you also have your idle speed control on this side. Little screw right here, and all that's doing is opening up the throttle more or less and allowing more air at idle. So you can control your idle speed. And back to the metering block, actually I skipped it. There are these 4 tiny screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, that you can see on here. And these little screws adjust how much gas is passing through to mix with the idle air. And there's a few different ways you can set that, with a vacuum gauge, with an AFR gauge, by hearing. I've met people who can literally just listen to the sound of your car and set all the parameters of it and be pretty close. It's pretty cool. But there's a lot of adjustment. That's the nice thing about this. It's a performance/race-based carburetor, so you get all the adjustments you want. On this side, on the other passenger side on this, we have another idle speed screw, so you can adjust the secondary idle. So driver side on this, or this side with the throttle linkage, adjust the primary blades. So you can see the blades open. And then this side controls the secondary, this second set of blades on the back of the carburetor. So they give you independent adjustment of those blades, which helps on like a single plane carburetor like mine, because the distribution might not be perfect, or it might not be as simple, whereas on a dual plane they're meant for more for like lower RPM or cruising cars, but they get better distribution because they have crossing planes, dual planes. So the backside, effectively the same thing on the secondary bowl. You also have accelerator pump, hence double pumper, and you have a plug instead of a power valve on this side. So to compensate for that, they say that the power valve basically enriches the mixture by about 10 numbers or 10 jets. So on the front, we know that the power or the main jets were 80s with the working power valve. On the secondary, since there is no power valve to enrich it off the base, they actually make that a 90 main jet to compensate for that. So 80 main jet in the front with the power valve, secondary is a 90 main jet. And they do that a lot on race carburetors. You might even find some where they have no power valves and they just either have square jetting or they have it just slightly off a couple numbers because they know what works. And that's pretty high race application. You know, you're not really doing that for a street/strip car. You know, that's pretty high level stuff. Not saying it's better for every application, but only very specific applications call for that. So doesn't mean it's perfect for everything. Back to the main body, we have these little jets. They look like main jets, but they're actually air bleeds. And what they do is they bleed in a little bit more air on either the idle, and then you have wide open throttle. And you can control these slightly. So if you're on a dyno and you have perfect, control over everything, then you can be like, hey, it's running a little lean at wide open throttle, but I don't want to bump up a jet. I want it to be a very minuscule change. So what you'll do is you'll close one of the orifices for the wide open throttle, and that'll basically choke out how much air can actually pass through that hole. And that's how you control that. This stuff you don't really mess with unless you really know what you're doing. Most applications, including mine, can be fixed with a simple jet change, and that should be close enough. If I have to get into these, I might just be splitting hairs, and it wouldn't necessarily be productive to my situation on my car. So I took this off thinking I was going to have to clean the inside, but it's actually really clean still. And you can kind of see, this is another thing about this carburetor, is the float has these little U-shaped cutouts in it. On the secondary side, it has jet extensions, which are basically little straws that stick out further, and the jet screws into it, so that, imagine this is the secondary bowl, as you accelerate, the fuel sloshes to the back of the bowl. So you actually need an extension so that it can still suck fuel from where the fuel is sloshing back to and still operate. Otherwise, you might experience a lean condition because it's not being able to suck the fuel. On the primary side, you don't have that issue because as you accelerate, the fuel actually rushes towards these jets. So they just threw this float in here, probably because they had a set or it was just what they were doing with all of them. Yeah, that's probably the end of this tech tip video. I'll talk some more about carburetors on the next one. Let me know if there's any questions or anything I missed. I'm not the carburetor guy, I just know something of them. You might see a video of me installing this on the Maverick, seeing how the linkage works, and sort of showing how to install a fuel log, stuff like that. Sort of the ins and outs of fuel log lengths. I didn't really go over it, but 4150 is longer and 4160 is shorter. And then Edelbrocks are completely different for the most part, unless you have like one of their 4150 carburetors that they make now. Those are fairly new, so not really worried about that. Alright, so I'll catch you guys on the next video. If you like what you saw, feel free to like, subscribe, keep up with the channel. I'm always just doing stuff. I'm gonna just throw this fuel bowl back on, and keep checking over the carburetor.